Hi, this is a Greenwatch podcast brought to you by CHARTIST magazine. I'm going to be talking about Sunak's net zero retreat. What does this amount to, and what is Labour going to do by comparison? Now, I'm David Toke, and I write the regular Chartist Greenwatch column. I am reader in energy politics at the University of Aberdeen, and I'm also the author of a forthcoming book published by Pluto Press in May 2024 entitled Energy Revolutions, Profiteering versus Democracy. Enough of this plugging, let's get on with the topic. Sunak's so-called net zero retreat, and I say so-called because there's actually no substantial change in the biggest headline measure, which is supposed to be moving the ban on manufacturing fossil fuel cars from 2030 to 2035. They weren't really banned anyway until 2035. There was some wheeze allowed to the car manufacturers, allowing them to call them hybrid vehicles from 2030, but really they're fossil fuel cars with a small battery and an small electric motor, and maybe another variation which is a plug-in function as well for an electric motor. But they're still fossil fuel motor cars, perhaps slightly more efficient. Some of them are a bit better than fossil fuel cars, but still fossil fuel motor cars. So really there's not much change, very little substantial change there at all. Then there's the so-called easing of the target of ending sales of fossil fuel boilers by 2035. They say, well, we only need to achieve 80% of this target. But what does this mean in practice? Nothing, because it was only a target. There are no laws to back it up. There's no financial consequences for consumers. There's no financial consequences for the public purse. So it really doesn't mean very much at all. Similarly, they're easing the target, they say, of ending installation of fossil fuel boilers in off-gas grid homes by 2026. Well, homes off the gas grid aren't necessarily being offered any extra money to change, which was a problem. So actually, there's no financial consequences in altering this target or easing this target, and it wasn't even much of a target because they were talking about heat pumps first, not obligatory heat pumps in off-gas grid homes by 2026. That affects about 15% of properties. So really very little change in terms of the so-called easing of this target to 80%. Well, the thing that does matter, of course, is scrapping the law, and it was a law that all new rental properties had to meet adequate energy efficiency standards by 2025. And of course that existing rental properties should meet energy efficiency standards, reasonable ones, by 2028. Well, those laws have been scrapped completely. Now, does that cost consumers money? Yes, it doesn't save consumers any money. So this talk of these net zero changes saving consumers money is an absolute load of hogwash. Trying to avoid swearing too much there. The only people it saves money for are the landlords, of course. Landlords save having to pay, in some very energy inefficient cases, up to a cap of £10,000 on making their rental properties more energy efficient and ensuring that their poor consumers don't spend God knows how much for their probably low earnings on fuel bills. And of course, this change favours the quite considerable number of MPs who are landlords, including, according to the campaign group 38 Degrees, nearly 1 in 5 Conservative MPs. So, will these changes save consumers money? No. The only people whose money will be saved will be landlords. So there's no incentive for consumers really to back Sunak at all, certainly not people who pay rent. So are Labour going to reverse these changes? Well, they say they're going to reverse the changes in the fossil fuel phase-out target year, but as I've explained, that's pretty meaningless anyway. So that doesn't amount to very much. They're silent on other issues mentioned. These targets for phasing out gas boilers, well, maybe those targets, as I've said, don't really mean very much anyway, because it didn't involve any guaranteed state spending, and they're not guaranteed to save consumers money anyway, because people don't actually have to change things, stop buying gas boilers. But the only major change there was in Sunak's package, of course, is this abolition of the requirements for that by landlords to upgrade their properties to make them more energy efficient, and Labour has so far said nothing on that. So what's Labour doing differently? Well, Labour wants to reverse the planning ban on onshore wind farms in England, because they're still allowed in other parts of the UK anyway. And it's got big renewable energy targets, big sounding renewable energy targets. That's fine. And of course, Ed Miliband has been pushing a really big package of energy efficiency measures, but then Rachel Reeves came along in June and said, look, hang on here, we're not sure about this £28 billion a year of green spending. And Ed Miliband has to say, well, yes, we want £6 billion a year spent on energy efficiency, but we're not sure we're going to get up to that level from the start. So we're not really sure what they're going to be. And in theory, at least, they could start off by spending practically nothing. So actually, we don't know how much Labour are going to do. So the Tories are making some partly empty virtue signalling to their voter base, except, of course, if they happen to be landlords. If they're in the so-called red wall seats, where there may be less landlords, well, they're being conned, of course, because they're more likely to spend more money because they're paying out fuel bills, which will be higher without the requirements on landlords to make their properties more energy efficient. So, in effect, Labour are saying, well, we're going to be better than the Tories on these net zero measures, but we're not sure by how much. And there we have it. You can get a lot of articles, a lot of stuff from the Chartist website, and you go to that at chartist.org.uk. And that's enough for me today. Bye-bye.